The Montana sky stretched endless and blue. The morning Clara Hensley learned that hope could be measured in heartbeats that never came. She'd been married to ranch hand Thomas Wade for 3 years, and every month brought the same crushing disappointment, the same silent tears, the same unspoken fear that she was broken beyond repair. When Dr. Morrison finally spoke the words she'd been dreading, confirming what her body had been telling her all along, Clara felt something inside her shatter like glass hitting stone. But what she didn't know, as she walked out of that office with her world crumbling, was that the rough-spoken cowboy waiting by the hitching post would offer her something no one else ever had: unconditional acceptance and a love that refused to surrender. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara Hensley had always thought of Sweetwater Valley as a place where dreams took root and grew like the wheat fields that stretched golden toward the horizon. The small Montana town nestled between the Bridger Mountains held maybe 300 souls, all of them tangled up in each other's business the way small towns tend to be. She'd grown up here, married here, and until this morning believed she'd raise her children here someday. The doctor's office smelled of carbolic acid and old leather. Clara sat on the edge of the examination table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, fingers twisted in the fabric of her Sunday dress, though it was only Thursday. Dr. Harrison Morrison had been the town physician for 30 years, had delivered half the children in Sweetwater Valley, and now sat across from her with the kind of expression that made her stomach turn to ice. "Mrs. Wade," he began, removing his spectacles to clean them with a handkerchief, a nervous habit she'd noticed before when he had difficult news to deliver. "I've reviewed all the tests we conducted over the past 6 months." Clara's throat constricted. She could hear the clock on the wall ticking, each second stretching into eternity. Through the window behind Dr. Morrison, she could see Main Street, see Martha Peterson sweeping the boardwalk in front of her general store, see old Henry Dalton leading his mule toward the livery stable. Normal life continuing while hers fell apart. There's no easy way to say this. Dr. Morrison replaced his spectacles and met her eyes with practiced sympathy. "Given the scarring from the fever you suffered 2 years ago and the results of our examinations, I'm afraid the likelihood of you conceiving a child is extremely remote." "I'm very sorry, Clara." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd suspected, of course. 3 years of marriage without even a hint of pregnancy, while it seemed every other woman in Sweetwater Valley swelled with new life as easily as breathing. But suspecting and knowing were two entirely different creatures. "Remote," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "But not impossible." Dr. Morrison's pause told her everything she needed to know. "In my professional opinion, Mrs. Wade, you should prepare yourself for the reality that natural conception is, for all practical purposes, impossible. The damage to your reproductive system was simply too severe." Clara nodded mechanically, not trusting herself to speak. The fever had come on suddenly 2 winters ago, a violent illness that had nearly killed her. She'd survived, but apparently not intact, not whole, not woman enough to do what women were meant to do. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear," Dr. Morrison continued gently, "but there are other ways to build a family. Adoption, perhaps, or—" "Thank you, Doctor." Clara stood abruptly, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "I should go. Thomas will be wondering where I am." That was a lie. Thomas Wade, her husband of 3 years, was working the Henderson Ranch 15 miles north of town, wouldn't be back until Saturday evening. But she couldn't bear another moment in this office. Couldn't stand the pity in Dr. Morrison's eyes. Couldn't face the platitudes about God's plan and accepting his will. She paid the receptionist with coins that felt impossibly heavy in her palm, then stepped out onto the wooden boardwalk. The autumn sun was warm on her face, at odds with the cold spreading through her chest. People moved about their business, nodding greetings as they passed. She managed weak smiles in return, wondering if they could see it on her face. This new knowledge that marked her as defective, Incomplete. Clara walked without direction, her feet carrying her past the church where she and Thomas had married, past the schoolhouse where children's laughter rang out from the open windows, each sound a small knife to her heart. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and there she stopped, staring out at the mountains that had always seemed to promise something better, something more. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. She envied its freedom, its lack of expectation, its simple existence without the weight of failed hopes and broken dreams. Mrs. Wade. The voice startled her. She turned to find herself face to face with Jackson Cole, leading a magnificent chestnut stallion by the reins. Jackson was newer to Sweetwater Valley, having arrived about 8 months ago to work as foreman at the Riverside Ranch. He was tall, built like someone who'd spent his entire life working with his hands, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. Mr. Cole. She quickly wiped at her face, mortified to realize tears had escaped without her notice. "I didn't hear you approach. Didn't mean to startle you." His voice was rough, weathered by years of outdoor work and sparse conversation. He studied her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "You all right?" "Fine, just fine." The words came automatically, the shield she'd learned to raise whenever anyone got too close to the truth. Jackson didn't move, didn't pretend to believe her obvious lie. The horse beside him, a beautiful animal with intelligent eyes, nudged his shoulder as if prompting him to action. "This is Copper," Jackson said, changing the subject with unexpected grace. "Just bought him from the Mathewson place. Figured I'd walk him through town, let him get used to the noise and people before I start working with him proper." Clara managed a genuine smile, grateful for the distraction. "He's beautiful, smart too. Watch this." Jackson made a subtle gesture with his hand, and the horse immediately lowered his head, allowing Clara to reach up and stroke his velvet nose. "Not many horses will do that with a stranger. He's got good instincts about people, unlike most people," Clara said before she could stop herself. Something flickered in Jackson's expression, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who'd also learned that people's judgment often fell short of accuracy. "I found that animals generally have better sense than folks give them credit for. They judge what's real, not what they've been told to think." The observation was more perceptive than she'd expected. Most people in Sweetwater Valley knew Jackson Cole as a quiet man, excellent with horses, kept to himself mostly. Rumors swirled about him the way they did about anyone who arrived without family connections or a well-documented past. Some said he'd been a soldier. Others claimed he'd had trouble with the law down in Texas. Clara had paid the gossip little mind, having learned that small-town speculation often bore little resemblance to truth. "Mrs. Wade," Jackson said after a moment of comfortable silence, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but you look like you just got some hard news. And while I'm not one for meddling, I know what it's like to carry weight alone. Sometimes it helps to hear that whatever you're dealing with, it doesn't define your whole story." The kindness in his words, unexpected and undeserved, broke something loose inside her. More tears came, and this time she couldn't stop them. She turned away, embarrassed, but Jackson simply stood there, a steady presence that demanded nothing, offered everything. "I'm sorry," she managed between quiet sobs. "I don't usually fall apart in the middle of town. Town's edge, technically." His gentle humor helped somehow. "And I've seen plenty of people fall apart in worse places for lesser reasons." "You're doing fine." Clara took a shuddering breath, trying to compose herself. In the distance, she could see Martha Peterson watching from her store, could imagine the gossip this would generate. Clara Wade crying in public, talking to that mysterious Jackson Cole. By supper time, the whole town would have invented 6 different explanations, each more scandalous than the last. "I should go," she said, straightening her shoulders with effort. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Cole. Not many would stop for a near stranger having a moment of weakness." "We're all strangers until we're not," Jackson replied. "And seems to me Sweetwater Valley could use more folks willing to stop and see each other as human beings instead of just subjects for gossip." The observation was so accurate it made her smile despite everything. "You've learned our town well in just 8 months. Doesn't take long to recognize familiar patterns." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Mrs. Wade, I don't know what you learned today, but I do know this. Whatever it was, it doesn't change who you are. Only you get to decide that." With that, he tipped his hat and continued down the street, with Copper following obediently, leaving Clara standing alone, but somehow less isolated than she'd felt moments before. His words echoed in her mind as she finally turned toward home, toward the small house she and Thomas rented on the south side of town, toward an empty future she hadn't asked for, but would have to face nonetheless. The house was quiet when she entered, just the tick of the mantel clock and the creak of floorboards under her feet. 3 rooms total, a main living area with a kitchen on one side, a bedroom and a small washroom. Thomas had promised they'd build something bigger once children came, once they needed more space. She looked around now at the home they'd made together and saw only what would never fill it. No children's toys scattered on the floor, no small shoes by the door, no laughter echoing off the walls. Clara moved through the rooms mechanically. Starting supper preparations, though, she had no appetite. Straightening things that didn't need straightening. Avoiding the mirror because she couldn't bear to see her own face. Couldn't stand to confront the woman who wasn't woman enough to give her husband the family he deserved. Thomas was a good man, kind and steady. He'd courted her properly, asked her father for permission, married her in the church with half the town as witnesses. He worked hard at the Henderson Ranch, saved his money, never raised his voice or his hand. He deserved better than a broken wife who couldn't give him children. The thought hit her with sudden, terrible clarity. He could leave her. Should leave her, really. Find someone whole, someone who could bear him the sons he needed to help with the ranch they dreamed of owning someday. She wouldn't blame him if he did. Montana Territory had informal divorce options for marriages that didn't produce children. Some couples simply separated, the husband finding a new wife while the first faded into spinsterhood or moved away to avoid the shame. Was that her future? Either clinging to a marriage built on obligation while Thomas's resentment grew, or facing the disgrace of separation, becoming one of those pitied women who haunted the edges of town life. Useful only for the most menial work, whispered about, avoided. The pot of stew she'd been preparing boiled over, the hissing sound jerking her back to the present. She cleaned up the mess with shaking hands, then abandoned the cooking entirely. Instead, she sank into the chair by the window, watching the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to mock her with their beauty. Thomas wouldn't be home for 2 more days. 2 days of carrying this knowledge alone, of deciding how to tell him, of preparing for his reaction. Would he be angry? Disappointed? Would he try to be noble about it? Tell her it didn't matter, even though it clearly did? Or would he be honest, admit what they both knew, that a marriage without children was a marriage incomplete? Clara sat there as darkness fell, not bothering to light the lamps, letting the shadows swallow her whole. Outside, Sweetwater Valley settled into its evening rhythms. Families gathered for supper. Children were called in from play. Husbands returned home to wives who could give them what mattered most. And somewhere out there, Jackson Cole was probably tending to that beautiful horse of his, offering quiet words and patient hands to an animal that had no expectations beyond food and shelter and kind treatment. She envied Copper that simplicity, that uncomplicated existence. The night deepened, bringing with it the chill that came to Montana mountains even in autumn. Clara finally rose to light a lamp and prepare for bed, though she doubted sleep would come easily. Tomorrow, she faced the town again, would endure the knowing looks from women who'd somehow learned her shame through the mysterious network of small-town gossip. She'd hold her head high, maintain her dignity, pretend her world hadn't shattered. But tonight, alone in the darkness, she allowed herself to grieve for the children she'd never bear, the future she'd never have, the woman she'd never be. Tomorrow she'd be strong. Tonight, She could be broken. Saturday arrived with unseasonable heat, the kind of weather that made animals nervous and tempers short. Clara had spent the past 2 days moving through her routines like a ghost, speaking to neighbors when necessary, shopping at Peterson's store with her eyes down, avoiding the church ladies, who'd surely heard something by now and would want to offer sympathy wrapped in judgment. Thomas was due home by evening. She'd rehearsed the conversation 100 times, tried on different words, like ill-fitting dresses, searching for ones that might soften the blow. None felt adequate. How did you tell a man his dreams were dead because you were the one who'd killed them? The afternoon found her at the creek that ran along the eastern edge of town, a place she'd always gone when the walls of her small house pressed too close. The water ran low this time of year, more rocks than stream, but the sound of it moving over stone had always soothed her. She sat on the bank, her bare feet dangling in the cool water, watching dragonflies dart above the surface. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thought I might find you here. Clara's heart jumped. She turned to see Jackson Cole approaching on foot, his hat shading his eyes from the brutal sun. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, no wasted motion, no unnecessary hurry. Mr. Cole. She pulled her feet from the water, suddenly conscious of the impropriety. A married woman alone with a single man, even in broad daylight at the edge of town, would fuel gossip for weeks. Didn't mean to intrude. He stopped a respectful distance away. Saw you walking in this direction earlier. Creek seemed like the likely destination on a day this hot. You followed me. The question came out sharper than intended. No, ma'am. His tone held no offense. I was heading out to check the fence line at Riverside's eastern pasture when I noticed you. Figured I'd make sure you were all right, given how you looked the other day. Clara felt shame heat her cheeks. I apologize for my display on Thursday. It was unseemly. It was human. Jackson moved closer, but didn't sit, maintaining the proper distance even as his eyes held genuine concern. We all got breaking points, Mrs. Wade. Nothing shameful about reaching yours. Before she could respond, a sound carried across the afternoon air, faint but unmistakable, a child crying. Both of them turned toward it simultaneously. The sound came from downstream, beyond the bend where the creek deepened before emptying into the larger river. That's the Lawson boy, Clara said, recognition sharp in her voice. Jimmy, he's only 6. They moved together without discussion, following the sound that was growing more frantic. As they rounded the bend, the situation became terrifyingly clear. Young Jimmy Lawson had ventured onto the rocks in the middle of the creek, where it widened and deepened, probably chasing frogs or crawfish. But the stones were slick with moss, and now the boy was trapped on a boulder in the center, water swirling around it with deceptive strength. His foot was wedged between 2 rocks, and his attempts to free himself only drove it deeper. Help! The boy's voice cracked with terror. Somebody help me. Clara started forward, but Jackson's hand caught her arm. Current's stronger than it looks. Those rocks are treacherous. We can't just leave him there. Didn't say we would. Jackson was already removing his boots. But rushing in without thinking gets people drowned. Stay here. If I get into trouble, run for help. Don't try to save me yourself. He moved into the water before she could argue, testing each step, using his considerable strength to brace against the current that was indeed stronger than its placid surface suggested. Clara watched, her heart in her throat, as he navigated the treacherous crossing. Jimmy, Jackson called, his voice steady and calm despite the danger. I need you to stop moving, son. Every time you pull, you wedge that foot tighter. Can you do that for me? Just stay still? The boy, tears streaming down his face, managed a nod. He stopped his frantic struggling, though his small body shook with the effort of holding still. Jackson reached the boulder, moving carefully around to assess the situation. Clara could see his lips moving, talking to Jimmy in that same steady voice, though she couldn't make out the words over the water's rush. Then he was working at the rocks, his powerful hands finding purchase, shifting stones with careful precision. It seemed to take forever, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, Jackson lifted Jimmy free, cradling the boy against his chest as he began the dangerous journey back. His foot slipped once on the slick stones, and Clara gasped, but he caught himself, readjusted his grip on the child, and continued. When they reached the bank, Jimmy immediately burst into fresh tears, this time from relief rather than fear. Jackson set him down gently, kneeling to examine the boy's foot, which was scraped and already swelling, but didn't appear broken. "You're all right," Jackson said quietly. "Scared yourself good, but you're all right." "I'm sorry," Jimmy sobbed. "Mama told me not to go in the water without Papa, but I saw a big bullfrog, and I thought I could catch it, and you learned why your mama's rules exist," Jackson finished, not unkindly. "That's how we get wisdom, son. Sometimes the hard way." Clara knelt beside them, her practiced hands examining Jimmy's injuries with the efficiency born of years helping Dr. Morrison with various town emergencies. "Nothing broken. We'll get you home, get this cleaned up properly. Your parents will want to see you. Are they going to be mad?" Jimmy's lip trembled. "They're going to be grateful you're alive," Clara said firmly, "though I expect there'll be consequences for disobeying. That's different from anger." Jackson lifted the boy easily, settling him against his hip like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Come on, let's get you back to town. Mrs. Wade, would you mind leading the way? My boots are back upstream." The three of them made their way back along the creek bank, Jimmy clinging to Jackson's neck, Clara retrieving the abandoned boots before heading toward the Lawson house on the north side of town. As they walked, she couldn't help but notice the gentleness with which Jackson handled the frightened child, the steady stream of calm words that helped Jimmy's breathing return to normal. "You're good with children," she observed, then immediately regretted the words. They highlighted what she could never give Thomas, never contribute to any family. "Had younger siblings growing up," Jackson replied, either missing or graciously ignoring the pain in her voice. "Learned early that scared kids need steady adults, not more fear." They reached the Lawson house to find Sarah Lawson on the front porch, clearly just realizing her son was missing. Her face went white when she saw Jimmy in Jackson's arms, then red with relief and brewing anger. "James Michael Lawson." She rushed forward, taking her son from Jackson's arms. "Where have you been?" "I've been calling for 10 minutes. He got his foot wedged in the rocks downstream," Jackson explained before Jimmy could speak. "Mrs. Wade and I happened by. The boy's shaken up but not seriously hurt. Might want Dr. Morrison to look at that ankle, though, just to be certain." Sarah Lawson's expression transformed as understanding dawned. "You saved him." She looked between Jackson and Clara, tears suddenly streaming. "Oh God, he could have drowned." "Thank you. Thank you both." The commotion had drawn neighbors. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered, all wanting to hear the story. Jackson looked increasingly uncomfortable with the attention, backing away from the cluster of grateful parents and curious onlookers. "It wasn't anything," he said when pressed for details. "Just happened to be in the right place, and had the courage to go into dangerous water," added Michael Lawson, Jimmy's father, who'd arrived home from his carpentry shop. Most men would have hesitated, worried about their own safety. "You didn't." Clara watched Jackson deflect the praise with growing admiration. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the gratitude, as if saving a child's life was simply what anyone would do, not worth particular notice or celebration. "Mr. Cole is being modest," she found herself saying. He assessed the situation quickly, moved with confidence, and kept Jimmy calm throughout. It was quite remarkable. Jackson's eyes found hers across the crowd, something unreadable in their depths. Then Thomas Wade's voice cut through the gathered neighbors. "Clara!" Her husband pushed through the small crowd, his face confused, taking in the scene, his wife, disheveled and damp at the edges, standing with Jackson Cole, surrounded by half the neighborhood. Clara saw the questions forming behind his eyes, the familiar tension that came whenever Thomas felt uncertain of his standing. "Thomas." She moved to his side immediately, taking his arm. "You're home early. Finished the fence work ahead of schedule." His eyes never left Jackson. "What's going on here?" Sarah Lawson quickly explained about Jimmy's rescue. her words tumbling over each other in relief and gratitude. Thomas listened, his expression shifting from suspicion to reluctant appreciation. "That was well done," he said finally, extending his hand to Jackson. "Thank you for looking after my wife and helping the boy." "Your wife helped," Jackson replied, shaking Thomas's hand briefly. "She's the one who recognized Jimmy's voice, knew to move quickly." The acknowledgement surprised Clara. Most men would have taken full credit, diminished her role to that of a worried bystander. But Jackson stated it as a simple fact, her contribution as valuable as his own. "Still," Thomas said, his arm sliding around Clara's waist in a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. "Appreciate you being there." The crowd began dispersing as the drama concluded. Michael Lawson invited Jackson for supper as thanks, but the cowboy declined politely, citing work that needed finishing before dark. He collected his boots from Clara with a nod, then disappeared down the street, leaving behind a cluster of neighbors re-evaluating their assumptions about the quiet foreman from Riverside Ranch. Thomas walked Clara home in silence. She could feel the questions building in him, the need to understand why his wife had been alone at the creek with another man, even if that man had just saved a child's life. The conversation she'd been dreading about Dr. Morrison's diagnosis now competed with having to explain something entirely innocent that would sound suspicious in the retelling. "You went to the creek alone," Thomas said finally, as they entered their small house. "It wasn't quite an accusation, but close. I needed air." The house felt stifling, and Cole just happened to be there. Clara turned to face him, seeing the insecurity that Thomas usually hid beneath bluster and hard work. "He was heading to check fence lines. He stopped to make sure I was all right. Then we heard Jimmy crying. That's all, Thomas. Nothing improper occurred. I'm not saying it did, but his tone suggested otherwise. Just seems strange, that's all. You alone with him twice in 1 week. Thursday was an accidental meeting in town. Today was Providence that saved a child's life." Clara felt her own patience fraying. "Are you really going to make this about your pride when a 6-year-old boy could have died?" Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. "No, you're right. I'm sorry." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as frustration. "It's been a long week. Henderson's pushing to get the herd moved before the weather turns, and I've been working double shifts." "I know." Clara softened, remembering that Thomas wasn't the enemy here. If anything, he was another victim of her broken body. "Thomas, I need to tell you something. I saw Dr. Morrison on Thursday. The shift in conversation caught him off guard." "What? Why? Are you sick?" "No, I'm not sick." She took a breath, steadying herself. "We've been married 3 years without any sign of a baby. I asked him to examine me, to see if something was wrong." Thomas went very still. And there is." The words came out flat, drained of emotion because feeling would destroy her. "The fever I had 2 years ago caused damage. Dr. Morrison says natural conception is impossible." The silence that followed felt alive, a presence in the room. Thomas stared at her, processing, and Clara watched his face carefully for signs of what would come next. Anger, disappointment, rejection. "Impossible," he repeated finally. "Not unlikely. Impossible. Yes." Thomas moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid. "I see." 2 words that contained multitudes. Clara waited, her heart hammering, for whatever judgment would follow. Instead, Thomas surprised her. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "There are options. Adoption, maybe. Or you could leave me." The words escaped before she could stop them. "Find someone who can give you children. I'd understand, Thomas. I wouldn't blame you." He turned then, his expression hurt. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd abandon you because of something you can't control? I think you deserve better than a broken wife. Don't." His voice sharpened. "Don't talk about yourself that way. You're not broken, Clara. You're just..." He struggled for words. "You're dealing with something difficult. That's all." It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like pity, and pity was worse than anger. At least anger was honest. Pity was just delayed disappointment, kindness that would curdle into regret given time. "I'm tired," she said, unable to continue this conversation. "It's been an exhausting day. I think I'll lie down before supper." Thomas let her go, standing alone in their small living room as Clara retreated to the bedroom and closed the door. She lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered how many more such conversations awaited them. How long before Thomas's noble patience ran out? How long before he looked at her with resentment instead of love? Through the window, she could hear the sounds of Sweetwater Valley settling into Saturday evening. Families gathering, children playing their last games before being called inside. The distant sound of someone's off-key piano filtering through the warm air. Normal life, continuing despite her private catastrophe. She thought of Jackson Cole, returning to his solitary quarters at Riverside Ranch, probably caring for Copper and the other horses with that quiet competence she'd witnessed twice now. He lived alone, built no family, seemed content with a life reduced to work and animals and minimal human connection. Maybe that was wisdom, expecting nothing, being disappointed by nothing, existing in the simple space between sunrise and sunset without hope's constant betrayal. Clara closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she replayed the afternoon. Jimmy's terrified face, Jackson's steady calm, the way he'd handled the crisis without hesitation or grandstanding, and his words from Thursday, unexpected and unearned. "Whatever you learn today, it doesn't change who you are. Only you get to decide that. But what if you didn't know who you were anymore? What if the thing you'd built your identity around, the assumption of future motherhood that shaped every girl's understanding of her purpose, was suddenly stripped away? Who was Clara Wade if not a future mother? What was her purpose, if not to bear children and raise them into decent adults? The questions circled like vultures, and she had no answers that satisfied. Only the growing certainty that the life she'd imagined was gone, and whatever came next would be something entirely different. Something she'd have to learn to navigate without a map or guide or any assurance that the destination was worth reaching. The following week settled into an uncomfortable rhythm. Thomas threw himself into work at the Henderson Ranch with renewed intensity, leaving before dawn and returning after dark most days. When he was home, a careful politeness governed their interactions, both of them dancing around the diagnosis like it was a sleeping bear they feared waking. Clara maintained her routines with mechanical precision. She helped at the general store twice a week, assisted Dr. Morrison when needed, attended church on Sundays with Thomas's hand formal at her elbow. But the joy had leaked out of everything, leaving only the hollow performance of a life that no longer fit. The town had learned her secret, of course. Small places kept no confidences for long. Women who'd once been friends now offered sympathetic smiles tinged with relief that tragedy had visited someone else's door. Conversation stopped when she approached, then resumed with forced cheerfulness about topics carefully scrubbed of any mention of children or pregnancy or the future. Only Martha Peterson at the general store treated her the same. Perhaps because Martha herself had never married or had children, and knew what it meant to be measured by what you lacked rather than what you possessed. "People will find something new to gossip about soon enough," Martha said one afternoon, as Clara helped stock shelves. "Human nature. We're all just looking for stories that make our own lives feel less disappointing by comparison. That's a cynical view. Maybe, but I've lived in Sweetwater Valley my whole life, seen how this town chews through one scandal after another like a dog with bones. You'll be old news by Christmas, I'd wager." Clara wanted to believe her, but 4 weeks after Dr. Morrison's diagnosis, the looks and whispers showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, they'd intensified when word spread that Thomas had been seen at the saloon more frequently, drinking with other ranch hands, staying out late. The narrative was writing itself. Good man trapped in a disappointing marriage, seeking solace wherever he could find it. The truth was both more complicated and more simple. Thomas wasn't cruel or unfaithful. He was just absent, physically and emotionally, processing his own grief for the future he'd lost, in the only way he knew how. by pretending it didn't exist. It was early November when everything shifted. Clara was walking home from Dr. Morrison's office, where she'd been helping organize his medical supplies, when she spotted a crowd gathered outside the telegraph office. The cluster of men looked agitated, voices raised in that particular way that signaled bad news. "What's happened?" she asked Mrs. Henderson, who stood on the periphery looking worried. "Bank foreclosure notices," the older woman replied grimly. "Territorial Bank in Helena. They've called in loans for half the ranches in the valley. People have 60 days to pay in full or lose everything." Clara's stomach dropped. The Henderson Ranch, where Thomas worked. The Riverside Ranch, where Jackson served as foreman. The smaller homesteads that barely scraped by in good years, let alone when facing unexpected financial demands. How many properties? 7 ranches, 12 homesteads. It's a disaster. Mrs. Henderson wrung her hands. "My husband's beside himself. We don't have that kind of money saved." Nobody does. The implications cascaded through Clara's mind. If the ranches failed, the ranch hands would lose their employment. Thomas would be out of work. They'd have no income, no way to pay rent on their small house. They'd have to leave Sweetwater Valley, start over somewhere else with nothing. Maybe that wouldn't be so terrible, a small voice whispered. A fresh start where nobody knew about her barrenness, where she could be just Clara instead of Clara who can't have children. But the selfish thought was immediately overwhelmed by concern for the families who would be destroyed by this. Good people who'd worked themselves to exhaustion trying to build something lasting in this hard country. The crowd was dispersing now, men heading to the saloon to drink and strategize, women returning to their homes to begin the grim arithmetic of survival. Clara continued toward her own house, but found her feet carrying her in a different direction instead, toward the Riverside Ranch. She told herself it was because Jackson deserved to know if he hadn't heard yet, that as foreman he'd need to prepare for what was coming. But deeper than that, beneath the rational justifications was something else, a need to see someone who'd shown her kindness without expectation, who'd treated her like a full person rather than a broken vessel. The Riverside Ranch sprawled across the western hills, its main house visible from the road, but the working buildings set farther back. Clara had never been here before. As she walked up the dusty drive, she felt increasingly foolish. What was she doing? What would Jackson think of a married woman appearing unannounced at his workplace? She nearly turned back, but then she saw him in the training corral, working with a young horse. Even from a distance, his patience was evident in every movement. The horse was clearly green, nervous, but Jackson moved with unhurried confidence, speaking too quietly for Clara to hear, but with an effect that gradually calmed the animal. He noticed her after a few minutes, surprise flickering across his face before he handed the horse off to a younger ranch hand and walked toward the fence where she stood. Mrs. Wade. He removed his hat, revealing hair dampened with sweat despite November's chill. "This is unexpected. I apologize for intruding. Now that she was here, the whole thing seemed absurd. I just came from town. There's news? Bad news." His expression sharpened. "What kind of news?" She told him about the foreclosure notices, watching his face darken as the implications became clear. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring past her toward the mountains. 60 days, he said finally. Middle of winter. They couldn't have picked a worse time. Is there anything that can be done? Depends. Some of these ranchers might have family with money, might be able to scrape together enough to satisfy the bank. Others... He shook his head. Others have been hanging on by their fingernails for years. This'll finish them, a thought occurred to Clara suddenly. What about combining resources? If multiple ranchers pooled their money, could they save even 1 or 2 properties? Jackson looked at her with new interest. Maybe. Depends on the amounts owed. But it would require cooperation, and ranchers aren't known for setting aside competition even when survival demands it. Then someone needs to convince them. The words came out before she'd fully formed the thought. Someone needs to organize a meeting, lay out the numbers, show them cooperation is the only path forward. That someone being who? But there was a hint of a smile in Jackson's voice, like he already knew her answer. "You," Clara said firmly. "You're respected. You saved Jimmy Lawson. People listen to you. People tolerate me because I'm good with horses. That's different from trusting me with their financial futures. Then we do it together." Again, that word slipping out so naturally. "I can help with the numbers, the organization. Martha Peterson will help too. She knows everyone's business because they all buy supplies from her store. If we present a unified plan, Mrs. Wade," Jackson's voice was gentle but firm, "your husband might have questions about you spending time organizing ranch business with another man." The observation stopped her cold. He was right, of course. Thomas was already sensitive about her interactions with Jackson. Spending significant time together, even for legitimate reasons, would fuel gossip and strain her marriage further. "You're right," she said quietly. "I wasn't thinking. I should go." "I didn't say you should go." Jackson opened the corral gate, stepping through to stand closer. "I said your husband might have questions. That's different. Question is, do you care more about avoiding those questions or about helping people who need it?" Clara met his eyes, seeing the challenge there. Not cruel but direct, asking her to decide who she wanted to be in this moment. "I care about helping," she said finally. "Then we'll help. But we do it right. We include other people, make it a community effort, not just the two of us. That way, nobody can say anything improper occurred." The thoughtfulness of his response touched something in Clara's chest. He was protecting her reputation while still taking her seriously, treating her idea as valid rather than dismissing it as a woman's naive interference. "When do we start?" "Tonight. There's a gathering at the saloon, ranchers discussing options. We show up, present the cooperative idea, see if we can get enough support to move forward. Women don't go to the saloon." "You're not going as a woman enjoying drinks." Jackson's mouth quirked. "You're going as someone with a solution to a community problem." Big difference. That evening, Clara told Thomas she was attending a community meeting about the foreclosures. He'd already heard the news and was too preoccupied with his own worries to question her closely. She dressed carefully, choosing her most practical dress, pinning her hair severely, trying to project competence rather than femininity. The saloon was packed when she arrived with Jackson. Every rancher and ranch hand in the valley crammed into the smoky space. Conversations stopped when they entered together, dozens of eyes tracking their movement to the bar where Samuel Pritchard, owner of the largest spread, held court. "Cole," Pritchard acknowledged with a nod. "Then less certainly, Mrs. Wade, this is unusual." "These are unusual circumstances," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady despite the attention. "Mr. Cole and I have a proposal that might help some of you keep your properties." For the next hour, they laid out the plan. A cooperative fund where ranchers would pool resources to save the most viable operations first, with agreements that saved ranchers would then help pay off others' debts once their own were secure. It required trust, sacrifice, and a willingness to think beyond individual survival. The response was mixed. Some ranchers immediately grasped the wisdom of cooperation. Others bristled at the idea of charity or worried about unfair advantage. Arguments erupted, voices rising, until Jackson's quiet authority cut through the chaos. "Everyone here knows the bank doesn't care if we live or die," he said. "They see numbers, not families, not land worked for generations. We can fight each other over scraps, or we can fight together for survival. Your choice." The simple truth of it settled the room. Slowly, reluctantly, men began nodding. Pritchard agreed to host a formal meeting in 3 days where they'd review all the debts, determine which properties were most salvageable, and create a structured plan. As the gathering broke up, Thomas appeared at Clara's elbow. She hadn't seen him enter, but his presence now felt heavy with unspoken questions. "Didn't know you were coming here tonight," he said carefully. It was a last-minute decision. "Jackson and I thought—" "Jackson." Thomas repeated the name like it tasted wrong. "You two seem to be spending considerable time together lately. We're trying to help the community." Clara kept her voice even. "That's all, is it?" Thomas's eyes searched hers. Because from where I stand, my wife is more interested in ranch business with another man than in her own home and marriage. The accusation stung precisely because it held a grain of truth. She had been seeking excuses to interact with Jackson, had been finding purpose in this work that her hollow marriage no longer provided. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "Isn't it? When's the last time you looked at me the way you look at him? Like I'm someone worth listening to, someone who matters." The pain in Thomas's voice cut through Clara's defensiveness. She saw suddenly what she'd been too absorbed in her own misery to notice. Her husband was drowning too, grasping for connection with a wife who'd emotionally abandoned him. "Thomas, forget it." He turned away. "I'm heading back to Henderson's. Got early shift tomorrow." He left without another word, disappearing into the November darkness. Clara stood frozen, guilt and frustration warring in her chest. "He's scared." Jackson's voice came from behind her. "Man's world is falling apart. Job threatened, wife distant, future uncertain. Fear makes people strike out, even at the wrong targets." "He's not wrong, though," Clara admitted. "I have been avoiding him, avoiding everything about our life together, because it hurts too much to face. Then maybe it's time to stop avoiding." Clara turned to face Jackson fully. "Why are you helping me? Really, you barely know me. You could stay out of all this, keep to your horses and your work." He was quiet for a moment, considering. When he spoke, his words carried weight, like truth held back too long, finally released. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for something beyond your control," he said. "To be defined by what people think you are instead of who you actually are. And I know what it's like to give up on yourself because everyone else already has." His eyes held hers steadily. "You haven't given up yet, Mrs. Wade. I can see that. And as long as you're still fighting, seems only right to help however I can." The honesty of it left Clara momentarily breathless. This man who owed her nothing, who had his own burdens to carry, was offering support without expectation of return. It was grace unearned, kindness undeserved, and it cracked something open in her chest that had been sealed tight since Dr. Morrison's diagnosis. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as more than my failures." "You haven't failed at anything," Jackson said firmly. "Life just dealt you a hard hand. What matters is how you play it from here." They stood in the cooling November night, two people shaped by loss and judgment, finding unexpected solidarity in each other's struggle. Around them, Sweetwater Valley continued its evening routines, oblivious to the small moment of connection happening in the shadow of its saloon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the cooperative meeting to organize, Thomas's hurt to address, the constant navigation of small-town judgment. But tonight, for just this moment, Clara felt less alone than she had in weeks, and in the distance, the mountains stood silent witness, ancient and unchanging, a reminder that human dramas played out beneath their peaks were both desperately important and cosmically insignificant, that survival required both fighting fiercely and holding on loosely, that the only way through hardship was straight ahead, one step at a time, with whatever allies Providence provided along the way. The cooperative meeting at the Pritchard Ranch brought together people who'd spent years competing, now forced to examine their pride against their survival. Clara sat at a side table with Martha Peterson, carefully recording numbers as each rancher laid bare their debts, their assets, their desperate calculations. The figures painted a grim picture. 7 ranches owed amounts ranging from $800 to $3,000. The 12 smaller homesteads owed less individually, but had virtually no assets to leverage. Combined, the valley needed nearly $18,000 in 60 days, an impossible sum. "We're ruined," muttered Frank Zimmerman, a homesteader who'd worked his land for 15 years. "Might as well start packing now." "Not necessarily." Jackson stood, moving to the map of the valley that Pritchard had hung on the wall. "If we're strategic, we can save most of you." He outlined a plan that was both ruthless and compassionate. 3 of the 7 ranches were hopeless, their debts too high relative to their land value. But if those families accepted buyouts from the remaining ranchers, pooling their smaller resources to help others while securing work contracts for themselves, the mathematics shifted. "You're asking us to give up our land," said Robert Chen, whose small ranch was among those Jackson had designated unsalvageable. "I'm asking you to choose a hard reality over an impossible dream," Jackson replied. "Your land alone won't save you. But your land, combined with employment guarantees and a share in the cooperative's future profits, might." The room erupted in argument. Men who'd built their identities around land ownership balked at becoming employees again. Others saw the wisdom but resented the messenger, this relative newcomer dictating terms. Clara watched it devolve into chaos until she found herself standing, her voice cutting through the noise. "My husband works the Henderson Ranch," she said loudly. "If that ranch fails, we lose everything. Our income, our home, our future in this valley. I'm not a rancher. I don't own land. But I understand what's at stake for the families here." She paused, meeting eyes around the room. "Pride is expensive. Can any of you truly afford it right now?" The question hung in the air. Slowly, grudgingly, the arguing subsided. Men returned to their seats. The discussion resumed, more subdued but more productive. By evening's end, they had a framework. 5 ranches would survive by absorbing the assets of the other 2. The 12 homesteaders would form their own smaller cooperative, pooling resources to save 8 of their properties, while the remaining 4 families accepted relocation packages. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. "We'll need someone to manage the numbers, coordinate with the bank," Pritchard said, his weathered face showing rare uncertainty. "Someone good with figures and negotiation. Mrs. Wade has been handling the accounting," Jackson observed, "and she's the one who identified the cooperative approach in the first place." Every eye turned to Clara. She felt the weight of their assessment. These men unaccustomed to trusting women with matters of business and finance. "I don't know," Pritchard said slowly. "No offense, Mrs. Wade, but this is complicated work." "High stakes? I keep the books for Dr. Morrison's practice," Clara said evenly. "I understand contracts and negotiations. And I have no personal stake in which ranches survive, which means I won't favor friends over what's actually best for the cooperative." "She's right about that," Martha added. "Clara's about the only person in this valley who won't play favorites." After more discussion, they agreed. Clara would coordinate the cooperative effort, working with Jackson to execute the plan. She'd have 6 weeks to save an entire community's way of life. Thomas was waiting when she arrived home near midnight. He sat at their small kitchen table, a half-empty whiskey bottle before him. "Community meeting ran late," he said. "It wasn't a question. There was a lot to organize." Clara hung her coat carefully, buying time. "We think we can save the Henderson Ranch. Yours and several others. We." Thomas poured another drink. "You and Cole, and Martha Peterson, and Samuel Pritchard, and 24 other people trying to survive this crisis, but mostly you and Cole." Thomas's words slurred slightly. "Everyone's talking about it, Clara. The Barren woman and the mysterious cowboy spending all their time together. Makes for interesting gossip. The cruelty of it struck her like a physical blow." "That's unfair, is it?" Thomas stood unsteadily. "Tell me honestly, are you attracted to him?" "That's not what this is about. Answer the question." "Are you attracted to Jackson Cole?" Clara's silence was answer enough. Thomas laughed bitterly. "At least you're honest about it. Most women would lie." "I haven't acted on anything," Clara said quietly. "I've been faithful to you, Thomas. To our marriage. Have you? Because it seems to me you left this marriage the day Morrison gave you that diagnosis. You've been gone ever since, and I've just been too stupid to admit it." The truth in his words was undeniable. Clara had abandoned their marriage emotionally, retreated into herself, left Thomas alone with his own grief and disappointment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to face you, how to face what I'd cost us." "You didn't cost us anything." Thomas's anger collapsed into something more fragile. "Life did. Bad luck did. But you blamed yourself and shut me out, and I don't know how to reach you anymore. He moved past her toward the bedroom, pausing at the door. Do what you need to with this cooperative business. Help save the ranches. But when it's done, Clara, we need to decide if there's anything left worth saving between us. The door closed, leaving Clara alone in the kitchen. She stood there for a long moment, then began preparing tea she didn't want, needing the ritual to steady herself. The following weeks blurred together in a frenzy of activity. Clara worked from dawn until late evening, coordinating between ranches, negotiating with the territorial bank, managing the complex web of buyouts and cooperative agreements. Jackson was her constant partner in the effort. His practical knowledge, complementing her organizational skills, they fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's thoughts, finishing each other's sentences. Clara found herself laughing again, found purpose and competence she hadn't felt since before her diagnosis. With Jackson, she wasn't the barren wife or the object of pity. She was simply Clara, capable and valued. The attraction between them grew more difficult to ignore. It was there in the moments their hands touched passing papers, in the way his eyes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking, in the careful distance they maintained, because neither trusted themselves to stand closer. We should talk about this, Jackson said one afternoon as they reviewed contracts in the empty church hall they'd commandeered as headquarters. There's nothing to talk about, Clara. Kept her eyes on the papers before her. Clara. The use of her first name made her look up. We both know something's happening here, something that can't happen. I'm married. I know. That's why it can't happen. Jackson leaned back in his chair. But pretending it doesn't exist isn't working either. Clara set down her pen carefully. What do you want me to say? That I think about you more than I should? That working with you these past weeks has made me happier than I've been in years? That I'm attracted to you in ways I shouldn't be, given my vows and my circumstances? I want you to be honest. With yourself, if not with me, fine, I'm attracted to you. I look forward to seeing you every day. I feel more myself with you than I've felt with anyone in my entire life. The confession poured out, reckless and necessary. But none of that matters because I made promises to Thomas. Promises I intend to keep, even if my heart isn't fully in it anymore. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. You deserve better than a marriage you're just enduring. Maybe, but Thomas deserves better than a wife who breaks her vows the moment things get difficult. Clara gathered the scattered papers, needing something to do with her hands. This cooperative work will be done in a few weeks. After that, we should limit our interactions, for both our sakes. Is that what you want? It's what's right. Those aren't always the same thing. Before Jackson could respond, the church hall door burst open. Thomas stood there, his face flushed with anger or liquor or both. I knew I'd find you here together, he said. Everybody knows. The whole town knows my wife spends every waking hour with another man, while I work myself to exhaustion, trying to keep us afloat. Thomas, please. Clara stood mortified. This is business. You know that, do I? Because from where I stand, it looks like my wife found something she was lacking at home and decided to pursue it. Propriety be damned. Jackson rose slowly, his posture careful. Mr. Wade, I understand you're upset, but nothing inappropriate has occurred between your wife and myself. You understand? Thomas laughed harshly. You understand nothing. You don't know what it's like to watch your wife slip away, to feel her pulling back more every day, to wonder if you're losing her or if you already lost her months ago. You're right, Jackson said quietly. I don't know that. But I do know your wife has been working night and day to save your job, your home, your entire community's future. Maybe instead of accusing her, you should be thanking her. The words had the opposite of their intended effect. Thomas lunged forward, his fist connecting with Jackson's jaw. The cowboy stumbled back but didn't fight back, simply stood there accepting the blow. Thomas, stop! Clara rushed between them. This is madness. You're making a scene over nothing. Nothing? Thomas's voice cracked. Our marriage is falling apart and you call it nothing? Our marriage was falling apart long before Jackson Cole arrived in Sweetwater Valley, Clara said, the truth finally spoken aloud. We've been pretending everything was fine when it hasn't been fine for months. Since the diagnosis, since you couldn't look at me anymore without disappointment in your eyes. That's not true, isn't it? You can barely stand to be in the same room with me. You work constantly, drink more than you used to, avoid coming home until you're certain I'll be asleep. Don't pretend this is about Jackson. This is about us, about what we lost and can't get back. Thomas stared at her, his anger collapsing into something more complicated. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I don't know how to be married to you anymore when all I see is what we'll never have. The honesty was devastating in its simplicity. Clara felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. Then maybe we can't be fixed. Maybe we're just two good people who tried and failed despite our best intentions. Are you asking me for a divorce? The word hung between them, impossible and inevitable. Clara looked at Thomas, at the man who'd courted her properly and married her honorably and been faithful and kind, even as disappointment ate away at their foundation. She looked at Jackson, standing silent witness to their dissolution, his jaw already bruising from Thomas's punch. I'm saying I don't know what I'm asking for, she said finally, except maybe honesty about what we want, what we can actually give each other, whether there's any path forward that doesn't destroy us both. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll be staying at the Henderson bunkhouse for a while. Give us both time to think. He left without another word. Clara stood frozen, listening to his footsteps fade, feeling the weight of their marriage's collapse settling over her like snow. I'm sorry, Jackson said quietly. I shouldn't have said what I did. Made things worse? You told the truth. That's not making things worse. That's making things clear. Clara returned to the table, looking at the paperwork that suddenly seemed trivial. We should finish this. The cooperative still needs us, even if my marriage doesn't. They worked in silence for the next hour, the ease between them replaced by careful formality. When they finally left the church hall, darkness had fallen over Sweetwater Valley. Jackson walked her home despite her protests, maintaining a respectful distance. For what it's worth, he said as they reached her door, I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. However this resolves, you'll survive it. You'll be all right, will I? Clara's voice was small. I'm losing my marriage. My reputation is ruined. Half the town thinks I'm an adulteress. The other half pities me for being barren. What kind of future is that? The kind you build yourself, instead of accepting what others think you deserve. Jackson's eyes were steady in the lamplight. You're more than your ability to have children, Clara. More than Thomas Wade's wife. More than what Sweetwater Valley decides you should be. The sooner you believe that, the sooner you can figure out who you actually want to be. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara standing on her porch, staring at the small house that no longer felt like home. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it this morning. But she was changed, had been changing for weeks, and there was no returning to the woman who'd sat in Dr. Morrison's office 2 months ago and felt her world end. That woman had believed her value lay in one thing she couldn't provide. This woman, standing in the November cold, was beginning to understand that value came from within, was defined by choices and actions rather than biology or others' expectations. It was a terrifying realization, and somewhere beneath the fear, the faint stirring of something that might eventually become hope. 3 weeks remained until the bank's deadline. The cooperative effort had crystallized into something tangible. Agreements signed, money pooled, a delegation scheduled to travel to Helena to negotiate final terms with the territorial bank. Clara had become the unlikely center of it all, the one person everyone trusted to handle the details fairly. But her personal life had fractured beyond recognition. Thomas remained at the Henderson bunkhouse, communicating only through brief, formal notes about practical matters. The town had divided into factions, those who admired Clara's work saving their livelihoods, and those who whispered about impropriety and wifely failures. Sunday service had become an ordeal. Reverend Michaels, Sweetwater Valley's elderly pastor, had begun delivering sermons about the sanctity of marriage, the dangers of prideful women, the importance of accepting God's will. Everyone knew who he meant. Clara endured it with her spine straight and her eyes forward, refusing to be shamed out of the church her family had attended for 3 generations. It was after one such service that Elizabeth Pritchard approached her on the church steps. Samuel Pritchard's wife was a formidable woman, respected and feared in equal measure, and Clara braced herself for judgment. "Mrs. Wade," Elizabeth said crisply. "A word, if you please." Clara followed her away from the dispersing congregation to a quiet corner of the churchyard. Elizabeth studied her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "My husband speaks highly of your work with the cooperative. Says you've managed this crisis with more competence than most men he knows. That's kind of him to say. Kind has nothing to do with it. It's factual." Elizabeth's tone brooked no argument. "However, there are concerns being raised. Not about your abilities, but about your circumstances." "My circumstances," Clara repeated flatly. "Your separation from your husband. Your association with Mr. Cole. Some members of the cooperative worry that scandal might jeopardize the bank negotiations. Territorial bankers are conservative men. They may not wish to do business with a woman of questionable reputation." The unfairness of it burned in Clara's chest. "My reputation was questioned the moment I couldn't produce children. Everything since has just been the town finding new ways to confirm their initial judgment. I'm not disagreeing with you." Elizabeth's expression softened slightly. "I'm telling you what's being said so you can prepare for it. There will be a meeting tomorrow night. Some members want to remove you from the delegation to Helena, replace you with a man less likely to raise eyebrows. They want to erase me from the effort I organized. They want to protect their interests. Whether that's fair to you is secondary to their survival." Elizabeth paused. "For what it's worth, I think it's cowardly. But I thought you should know what's coming." The next evening, Clara entered the Pritchard barn, where cooperative meetings were held, Jackson beside her. The tension was immediate, palpable. 40 men and 3 women filled the space, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to hostile. Samuel Pritchard called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. "We're here to discuss the delegation to Helena. There's been some concern about the composition, about how we'll be perceived by the territorial bank." "You mean concern about me?" Clara said, standing. "Let's be direct. Some of you want me removed because I'm a woman, because my marriage is troubled, because I've been working closely with Mr. Cole. Is that accurate?" Uncomfortable silence answered her. Finally, Frank Zimmerman spoke up. "It's nothing personal, Mrs. Wade, but we're asking these bankers for a lot of money, a lot of trust. We can't afford to give them reasons to doubt us, and my presence would make them doubt you. Your situation is unconventional," another rancher offered diplomatically. "In a perfect world it wouldn't matter, but we don't live in a perfect world." Jackson stood then, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Mrs. Wade knows more about the cooperative agreements than anyone in this room. She negotiated the terms. She structured the buyouts. She's the one who made this entire plan possible. You want to send someone else because it's more comfortable, more conventional. Fine, but don't pretend you're doing it for strategic reasons. Call it what it is. Cowardice." "That's easy for you to say," snapped Robert Chen. "You're not the one risking your life savings on this negotiation." "Neither are you anymore," Jackson countered. "Your land was one of the ones we couldn't save, remember? You accepted a buyout and employment contract because Mrs. Wade did the mathematics that showed it was your only viable option. And now you want to exclude her from seeing that work through." "Mr. Cole makes a valid point," Martha Peterson added from her seat. "We all benefit from Clara's work. Seems remarkably ungrateful to cast her aside now, because some of you are worried about appearances." The barn erupted in argument, men shouting over each other, women trying to be heard. The careful coalition Clara had built threatening to splinter under the weight of social convention and fear. "Enough!" Pritchard's voice boomed over the chaos. "This isn't getting us anywhere. We'll put it to a vote. Those in favor of Mrs. Wade remaining part of the delegation, raise your hands." Clara watched as hands rose, some immediately, others after hesitation. When Pritchard counted, the result was closer than she'd hoped. 23 in favor, 17 opposed. Motion carries, Pritchard announced. Mrs. Wade stays with the delegation. But Clara, you need to understand the concern. We're asking you to be above reproach in Helena. No private meetings with Mr. Cole. No appearance of impropriety. Can you agree to that? Every instinct rebelled against the unfairness of restrictions placed on her, but not on Jackson. On her, but not on any of the men who'd be part of the delegation. But arguing would only prove their point about her being difficult, unconventional, troublesome. I understand, she said evenly. I'll conduct myself appropriately. As the meeting broke up, Clara felt hands on her arm. She turned to find Dr. Morrison, who'd been sitting quietly in the back. Walk with me, he said gently. They strolled through the November darkness, their breath fogging in the cold air. The doctor was silent for a long while, as if gathering thoughts carefully. I owe you an apology, he said finally. When I gave you that diagnosis 2 months ago, I handled it poorly. Told you what you couldn't do, what you'd never have, without acknowledging all that you still were and could be. You were being honest. I asked for the truth. Truth without compassion is cruelty. Dr. Morrison stopped walking. I've been a physician for 40 years, Clara. I've delivered good news and bad news to hundreds of patients. But I've noticed something troubling in my old age. How quickly we define people by their limitations rather than their possibilities. What are you saying? I'm saying that you've spent 2 months believing you were broken because you couldn't have children. But I've watched you these past weeks organize this cooperative effort with more skill and determination than most people show in a lifetime. You're not broken. Clara! You're just discovering capabilities you didn't know you had because you were too focused on the one capability you lack. The kindness in his words unlocked something in Clara's chest. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted. I'm not the wife Thomas needs. I'm not the woman Sweetwater Valley expects. I'm just someone trying to figure out what comes next. That's called growth. It's uncomfortable but necessary. Dr. Morrison smiled. For what it's worth, I think you're becoming someone rather remarkable. Don't let this town's narrow imagination limit what you might achieve. The Helena delegation departed 4 days later. Samuel Pritchard led the group, with Clara, Jackson, and 3 other ranchers making up the party. The journey would take 2 days by wagon, another day for negotiations, then 2 days return. A week total away from Sweetwater Valley. Thomas appeared as they were loading supplies, his face haggard from weeks of heavy drinking and sparse sleep. Clara, he said awkwardly. Could I speak with you? She stepped away from the wagon, aware of curious eyes watching. Thomas twisted his hat in his hands, a gesture of nervousness she'd never seen from him before. I've been doing some thinking, he began. About us? About what I want? Clara's heart hammered, uncertain whether she was bracing for relief or devastation. I can't do this anymore, Thomas continued. The pretending, the trying to make something work that's been broken for too long. You were right. We started falling apart long before Cole arrived. I just didn't want to admit it. Thomas, let me finish. He met her eyes directly. I'm filing for divorce when you return from Helena. On grounds of irreconcilable differences, not adultery. I'll make sure everyone knows you've been faithful, that this is a mutual decision. It's the least I can do after how I've behaved these past weeks. The finality of it struck Clara like a blow. Even expecting this outcome, hearing it stated so plainly, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried to be the wife you deserved, and I tried to be the husband you deserved. We both tried. Sometimes that's not enough. Thomas managed a sad smile. Maybe we'll both be happier apart. Find what we're actually meant for, instead of forcing ourselves into shapes that never quite fit. He left before she could respond, disappearing back toward town. Clara stood frozen until Jackson's quiet voice broke through her shock. You all right? I don't know. She turned to face him. My marriage just ended, and I'm not sure if I feel sad or relieved or both. Probably both. Most true things are complicated. Jackson helped her into the wagon. Long ride ahead. Plenty of time to sort through what you're feeling. The journey to Helena passed in a blur. Clara sat in the back of the supply wagon with Martha Peterson, who'd insisted on coming despite not being part of the official delegation. The older woman's presence was a comfort, her practical commentary on the landscape and weather a distraction from the turmoil in Clara's mind. They camped the first night beside a creek, the men setting up tents while Clara and Martha prepared a simple supper. Jackson kept his distance as promised, careful not to give anyone reason to question propriety. But Clara felt his attention on her across the campfire, a steady presence even in separation. "He's a good man," Martha observed quietly as they washed dishes. "Decent, honorable, the kind who'd stand by someone through hard times." "Martha, please, I'm just saying. Once your divorce is final, once some time has passed, there's no reason you couldn't." "There's every reason." Clara scrubbed a plate harder than necessary. "The town already believes the worst about us. Anything that developed between Jackson and me would only confirm their suspicions, make them think we'd been improper all along. So you'll deny yourself happiness because of what small minds might think. I'll protect what remains of my reputation because I have to live in Sweetwater Valley. At least for now." Martha was quiet for a moment. "What if you didn't have to live there? What if you went somewhere new, somewhere your past didn't follow you?" The suggestion planted itself in Clara's mind like a seed. Leave Sweetwater Valley. Start fresh somewhere that didn't know her as Thomas Wade's barren wife or the woman whose marriage failed. Somewhere she could be just Clara, defined by her own choices rather than others' judgments. "Where would I even go?" she asked. "Anywhere. Helena needs bookkeepers and administrators. So does Billings, Great Falls, every growing town in the territory. You've got skills, Clara. Skills that transfer anywhere there's business being conducted." The possibility bloomed in her imagination, a life entirely her own, built on her capabilities rather than her relationships or her failings. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They reached Helena late the second afternoon. The territorial capital sprawled larger than anything Clara had seen, with proper streets and brick buildings and more people in one block than all of Sweetwater Valley combined. The delegation checked into a modest hotel, then spent the evening reviewing their presentation for the morning's bank meeting. Clara lay awake most of the night, rehearsing numbers and arguments, trying not to think about Thomas or Jackson or the future looming uncertainly ahead. When dawn finally came, she dressed in her most severe dress, pinned her hair with ruthless efficiency, and prepared to fight for her community's survival one last time. The Territorial Bank occupied an imposing building on Main Street. Its marble floors and dark wood paneling spoke of permanence and power. The bank president, Harold Donovan, was a silver-haired man with calculating eyes and a reputation for ruthless business practices. "Gentlemen," he said as they settled into his office, dismissing Clara entirely with his greeting, "I understand you wish to discuss the foreclosure notices." "We do," Pritchard said. "We've developed a cooperative plan that we believe satisfies the bank's concerns while allowing most borrowers to remain solvent." For the next hour, they laid out their proposal. Pritchard handled the broader strokes, but when Donovan asked detailed questions about specific properties, debt structures or cooperative governance, all eyes turned to Clara. She answered precisely, her numbers exact, her logic unassailable. Donovan's dismissive attitude gradually shifted to grudging respect as Clara demonstrated mastery of every aspect of the plan. When he tried to find weaknesses, she'd already anticipated and addressed them. When he suggested alternative structures, she explained why they wouldn't work, given the specific circumstances of Sweetwater Valley. "You put this together?" Donovan asked finally, directing the question to Clara for the first time. "I did, with input from the cooperative members." "Impressive." He leaned back in his chair. "Though I'm curious, why should the bank accept partial payment now, when we could foreclose, sell the properties, and likely recover more?" "Because the properties aren't worth what you think they are," Clara replied calmly. "Not in the current market, not with winter coming, not with the time and expense of foreclosure and resale. Our proposal guarantees you 80 cents on the dollar immediately. with the balance paid within 18 months at favorable interest rates. That's better than you'll get through foreclosure, and you know it. A smile tugged at Donovan's mouth. You've done your homework. I've done what was necessary to save my community. The negotiation continued into the afternoon. Donovan drove hard bargains on interest rates and payment schedules, but ultimately agreed to the cooperative structure. By evening, they had a signed agreement that would save most of Sweetwater Valley's ranches and homesteads. As they left the bank, Pritchard clapped Clara on the shoulder. You did it. Couldn't have happened without you. The praise should have felt vindicating. Instead, Clara felt only exhaustion and a strange emptiness. She'd saved the town that judged her, protected the community that whispered about her, ensured the survival of people who'd voted to exclude her from this very trip. That evening, as the delegation celebrated in the hotel restaurant, Jackson found her alone on the back porch, staring at the mountains that ringed Helena. You should be celebrating, he said. Should I? I just guaranteed I'll continue living in a place where half the people pity me and the other half distrust me. You don't have to stay in Sweetwater Valley. Clara looked at him sharply. Martha said the same thing. Then maybe you should listen. Jackson leaned against the porch railing. You've got skills people need, Clara. You could find work in any territory town, start over where nobody knows your history. Is that what you do? He was quiet for a moment. I've done it before. Starting over in new places. It works for a while, but eventually you have to decide if you're running towards something or just away from pain. And which were you doing when you came to Sweetwater Valley? Both, probably. His eyes met hers. But then I met someone who reminded me that running only works if you eventually find a reason to stop. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara's breath caught as Jackson moved slightly closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cold evening air. Jackson, I know. You're still married, still bound by vows, even if Thomas doesn't honor them anymore. His voice dropped lower, but someday you won't be. Someday you'll be free to choose what you actually want, instead of what obligation demands. When that day comes, I hope you'll consider choosing something that makes you happy, instead of something that makes you acceptable. He left before she could respond, returning inside to the celebration. Clara stood alone on the porch, her heart racing, understanding finally crystallizing. She'd spent her whole life trying to meet others' expectations, the dutiful daughter, the proper wife, the acceptable woman. And where had it gotten her? Divorced, judged, defined by her failures rather than her accomplishments. Maybe it was time to stop seeking acceptance and start demanding respect. Maybe it was time to choose herself instead of letting others' limitations define her possibilities. The mountain peaks glowed gold in the sunset, indifferent and eternal. Clara watched them until darkness fell, feeling something shift inside her. Not quite hope, not quite determination, but something that might eventually become both. Tomorrow, they'd return to Sweetwater Valley victorious. And then she'd decide what came next, not based on what the town expected, but on what she actually wanted, for the first time in her life. That choice felt like freedom. The delegation returned to Sweetwater Valley as heroes. News of the successful bank negotiation had preceded them, and half the town gathered at the edge of Main Street to welcome them home. Clara sat in the wagon beside Martha, watching ranchers embrace their wives with relief, children running to greet fathers who'd secured their futures. Samuel Pritchard stood on the back of a flatbed wagon, raising his hands for attention. Friends and neighbors, I'm pleased to announce that the cooperative has secured favorable terms with the territorial bank. Our ranches are saved, our homesteads protected. We owe this victory to many people, but especially to Mrs. Clara Wade, whose intelligence and determination made it all possible. The applause that followed was genuine but complicated. Clara saw gratitude in some faces, resentment in others, and in many a confusion about how to reconcile her accomplishment with their preconceptions about proper women's behavior. Thomas stood at the back of the crowd. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, disappearing into the general store. The finality of that turned back struck Clara harder than she'd expected. Whatever they'd once been to each other was truly finished. "Don't let him steal this moment," Martha whispered. "You earned this recognition. Take it." Clara managed a smile and a wave as people approached to offer thanks. But the celebration felt hollow, performed for an audience rather than arising from genuine joy. She'd saved the town, but she hadn't saved herself. The weeks that followed brought a strange new rhythm. The divorce proceedings moved forward quietly. Thomas's lawyer and Clara's lawyer, a stern woman from Helena that Martha had recommended, exchanging papers with clinical efficiency. Montana Territory had surprisingly progressive divorce laws compared to many states, allowing for dissolution based on irreconcilable differences without requiring proof of adultery or abandonment. Still, the process was brutal in its own way, dividing 3 years of marriage into lists of property and possessions, reducing shared dreams to legal language, signing papers that officially declared failure. Clara moved through it mechanically, feeling like she was watching someone else's life disintegrate. The town's response was predictably mixed. Some families invited her for Sunday dinners, treating her with careful kindness. Others crossed the street to avoid her, as if divorce might be contagious. The church ladies formed opposing camps, those who believed she'd been right to leave an unhappy marriage, and those who thought she'd violated sacred vows. Reverend Michaels called Clara to his office 2 weeks after her return from Helena. "Mrs. Wade," he began heavily, his aged face creased with disapproval, "I've been praying over your situation. I want to give you an opportunity to reconsider this divorce action, to seek counseling, to restore your marriage as God intended. Reverend, with respect, my marriage ended long before the legal proceedings began. Thomas and I both know it. Continuing would be living a lie that honors God's law is preferable to a truth that violates it." His voice sharpened. "You're setting a dangerous precedent, Clara. If every marriage dissolved the moment difficulties arose, where would that leave our social order? Our moral foundation? I can't speak for every marriage, only mine. And mine was causing more harm than good to both people in it. That's the kind of modern thinking that destroys communities." Michael stood, his judgment clear. "If you proceed with this divorce, I cannot in good conscience allow you to remain in full fellowship of the church. You'll be welcome to attend services, but you cannot participate in communion, cannot teach Sunday school, cannot hold any position of spiritual authority." The pronouncement stung, despite Clara's wavering faith. The church had been her community her entire life. Being officially marked as a sinner, relegated to the margins, felt like yet another loss in a season of losses. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for your honesty." "I hope you'll reconsider," Michael said, but his tone suggested he expected no such thing. Clara left the church office feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. Another tie to Sweetwater Valley severed, another reason to consider Martha's suggestion about leaving. She found Jackson at the Riverside Ranch that afternoon, working with a young mare in the training corral. He'd been avoiding town since their return from Helena, keeping to the ranch except for necessary trips. When he saw Clara approaching, something flickered across his face, hope, wariness, or some combination. "Mrs. Wade," he said formally, then caught himself. "Clara, I didn't expect to see you here. I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't judge me." She leaned against the corral fence. "Reverend Michaels just informed me I'm being removed from church fellowship." Jackson's jaw tightened. "For getting divorced from a man who couldn't accept you as you are. That's their version of Christian charity? And apparently God prefers I stay miserable but married." Clara managed a weak smile. "I'm starting to understand why you avoid churches. I avoid places where people use righteousness as a weapon." Jackson tied off the mare and joined Clara at the fence. "But I'm sorry you're dealing with this. I know the church mattered to you." "It did." "It does." Clara watched the mare circle the corral, nervous energy seeking release. "But maybe I've been clinging to things that don't serve me anymore out of habit rather than genuine faith. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the horse gradually calm. Finally, Jackson spoke. "I'm leaving Sweetwater Valley." The words hit Clara like cold water. "What? Riverside Ranch is being sold as part of the cooperative restructuring. New owners want to bring in their own foreman. I've been offered a position managing a horse breeding operation in Wyoming territory. Better pay, more autonomy." He paused. "I leave in 3 weeks." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her. Jackson, the one person who'd seen her clearly, who'd helped her discover capabilities she hadn't known she possessed, would soon be gone. "Wyoming," she repeated numbly. "It's a good opportunity. Beautiful country from what I hear. Fresh start." His eyes searched her face. "I wanted you to know before the town gossip machine told you, of course." That's good news. Congratulations." The formal words tasted like ash. Jackson studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Come with me," Clara's breath caught. "What? Come to Wyoming?" "Not as anything improper," he added quickly. "The operation needs an administrator, someone to manage accounts and breeding records. It's legitimate work, Clara, work you're more than qualified for. Jackson, I can't just—" "Why not? Your divorce will be final in 2 weeks. You have no job here, limited prospects, a community that can't decide whether to celebrate you or condemn you. What's actually keeping you in Sweetwater Valley besides familiarity?" The question struck at the heart of Clara's hesitation. What was keeping her? Fear of change. Fear of what leaving with Jackson would look like to the town. Fear of admitting she wanted something for herself instead of accepting what others deemed appropriate. "I need time to think," she said. "Take all the time you need. But Clara, at some point you have to decide if you're going to spend the rest of your life seeking approval from people who've already decided not to give it, or if you're going to build something that actually makes you happy." That evening, Clara sat in her small rented house. She'd moved out of the place she'd shared with Thomas and made lists. Pros and cons of staying versus leaving, of taking Jackson's offer versus finding work elsewhere, of every possible future she could imagine. But the lists felt hollow, logic trying to solve what was fundamentally an emotional question. Did she have the courage to choose herself, to pursue what she actually wanted, rather than what was safe or acceptable? A knock interrupted her circular thoughts. She opened the door to find Dr. Morrison standing on her porch, his medical bag in hand. "Doc? Is someone hurt?" No. I'm here to talk to you." He gestured to the interior. "May I come in?" Clara led him to her small sitting area. Confused by this unexpected visit, Dr. Morrison settled into a chair with the careful movements of a man feeling his 70 years. "I'm retiring," he announced without preamble. "Moving to California to live with my daughter. I've been putting it off for years, but my arthritis is getting worse, and this Montana winter nearly killed me last year." "I'm sorry to hear that. The town will miss you. The town will survive. But I have a proposal for you." He leaned forward intently. "These past months, you've demonstrated organizational skills and intelligence that frankly exceed most of the men in this valley. You managed a complex cooperative effort, negotiated successfully with territorial bankers, earned respect from people predisposed not to give it. Thank you. But I'm not sure where this is going. I'm offering you my practice. Not as a doctor, you don't have the training, but as an administrator and medical assistant. Dr. Franklin from Bozeman is interested in relocating here, but he needs someone who knows the community, who can manage the business side while he handles patient care. The position would pay well, give you standing in the community, a future here if you want it." Clara stared at him, stunned. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd have leapt at a few months ago. Security, respectability, a defined role in Sweetwater Valley. "I know about Jackson Cole's offer," Dr. Morrison continued. "Martha told me. I want you to have options, Clara, real choices, not just running from one uncertain situation to another." "Why?" Clara asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because I've watched you transform from a woman who believed her only value lay in her womb to someone who saved an entire community through sheer competence. That kind of growth is rare. I'd hate to see you waste it either by running away recklessly or by staying here diminished by people who'll never fully accept what you've become." His honesty was bracing. "So what do you think I should do?" "I think you should choose based on what serves your growth, not your fear. If staying in Sweetwater Valley as a medical administrator genuinely excites you, take my offer. If leaving with Jackson represents the future you actually want, do that. But don't let pride or shame make the decision. Let your authentic self decide." After Dr. Morrison left, Clara sat in the darkness, his words echoing. What did she actually want? Not what she should want, not what was most acceptable, but what would genuinely make her happy. The answer came with surprising clarity. She wanted to leave. Not just Sweetwater Valley, but the entire version of herself she'd been performing for years. The dutiful daughter, the proper wife, the woman who apologized for taking up space. She wanted to discover who Clara actually was when no one was watching, when she had the freedom to define herself. And if she was honest, she wanted to see what might develop with Jackson once the constraints of propriety and judgment were removed. The decision made, she felt both terrified and exhilarated. She spent the next week preparing quietly, selling what possessions she couldn't carry, settling final details of the divorce, arranging for her belongings to be shipped. She told only Martha and Dr. Morrison of her plans. Martha cried and hugged her fiercely, making her promise to write. Dr. Morrison simply nodded, as if he'd known what she'd decide all along. "You're doing the right thing," he said, "even if it doesn't feel like it yet." The night before her departure, Thomas appeared at her door. He looked better than he had in months, sober, clear-eyed, almost peaceful. "I heard you're leaving," he said. "News travels fast. Always does in small towns." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to say goodbye properly, and to apologize for how I handled everything these past months. You deserved better. We both deserved better than we were capable of giving each other." Clara opened the door wider. "Do you want to come in?" They sat together one last time, two people who'd tried and failed to build a life together, finding unexpected grace in their ending. "I hope Wyoming treats you well," Thomas said. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I hope the same for you. Maybe someday you'll meet someone who can give you the family you want. Maybe." Thomas stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Clara, I think you're brave. Braver than I could ever be. You're choosing yourself, even though the whole town will judge you for it. That takes courage I don't have." After he left, Clara cried for the first time since the divorce proceedings began. Not from regret, but from the release of finally, fully letting go. The morning she left Sweetwater Valley dawned cold and bright. Jackson waited with a wagon loaded with her few possessions, his own belongings packed alongside hers. A small group gathered to see them off, Martha crying openly. Dr. Morrison stern but approving, a handful of ranchers whose properties she'd saved, offering awkward thanks and best wishes. Notably absent were the church ladies, Reverend Michaels, and most of the people who'd known her entire life. Their absence spoke louder than any farewell. Clara climbed into the wagon beside Jackson, taking one last look at the town where she'd been born, married, and reborn into someone entirely new. The mountains beyond seemed to beckon, promising horizons she'd never imagined possible. "Ready?" Jackson asked quietly. Clara thought of everything she was leaving, the familiar streets, the known routines, the comfortable cage of others' expectations. Then she thought of everything ahead, uncertainty, possibility, the chance to discover who she might become without limitations. "I'm ready," as the wagon rolled forward, carrying them toward Wyoming and whatever future awaited. Clara felt the weight of Sweetwater Valley lift from her shoulders. She was no longer Thomas Wade's wife, no longer the barren woman, no longer defined by what she lacked. She was simply Clara, heading into the unknown with courage and hope, and the understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when the whole world insists you shouldn't. The Montana sky stretched endless and blue above them, and for the first time in years, Clara felt like she could breathe. The journey to Wyoming took 5 days through a country that seemed to expand with each mile traveled. Mountains gave way to rolling plains, then to terrain that combined both in unexpected harmony. Clara watched the landscape transform, feeling her own internal geography shifting in response. Jackson proved an easy traveling companion. He spoke when words added value, stayed silent when they didn't, and seemed attuned to Clara's moods without requiring explanation. They fell into comfortable rhythms, sharing the driving, preparing simple meals over campfires. Reading aloud from a book of poems Martha had pressed into Clara's hands at departure. On the 3rd night, camped beside a creek that sang over smooth stones, Jackson finally asked the question Clara had been expecting. "Do you regret leaving?" Clara considered carefully, watching sparks rise from their fire toward the star-filled sky. "I regret that leaving was necessary. That staying would have meant accepting a diminished version of myself. But the leaving itself. No, I don't regret that." "Good." Jackson poked at the fire with a stick. "Because there's something you should know before we arrive. The horse operation I'm managing, it's mine. I bought it with money I've been saving for 15 years. I told you I was hired as manager because I didn't want you to feel pressure, didn't want you thinking I was offering charity or anything beyond legitimate work." Clara absorbed this revelation. "So I'm not really your employee. You are if you want to be. The operation genuinely needs an administrator. But I wanted you to understand the actual situation before we arrived. You're coming to my ranch, Clara, as a partner in the business if you choose, or as staff if that feels more appropriate, or as something else entirely if that develops naturally over time." The honesty was both uncomfortable and refreshing. No games, no pretense, just truth laid bare for her consideration. "I appreciate you telling me," she said. "Though I'm still working through what I want, beyond the basics of survival and forward motion. That's fair. Take all the time you need. I've waited this long to build something worth having. I can wait a while longer to see what shape it takes." They arrived at the ranch on a clear afternoon that made everything seem possible. The property sprawled across a valley where mountains met grassland, with a main house built of logs and stone, several well-constructed outbuildings, and corrals that spoke of careful planning. A creek ran through the property, providing natural water for livestock and wildlife. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, taking it all in. "It's got potential," Jackson corrected. But she heard the pride beneath his modesty. Previous owner built it well, but didn't have the knowledge to make it profitable. That's where you come in, turning potential into reality. The main house was larger than Clara expected, with a spacious main room featuring a stone fireplace, a separate kitchen, and upstairs bedrooms. Jackson showed her to a room that clearly had been prepared for her arrival. Fresh linens on the bed, curtains at the window, even a small desk positioned to catch morning light. "I'll be in the room at the far end of the hall," Jackson said. "There's a hired hand, Miguel, who stays in the bunkhouse near the barn. He's been maintaining the place while I finalized things in Montana. Good man, trustworthy, minds his own business." The careful propriety of the arrangements touched Clara. Jackson was protecting her reputation even here, where no one from Sweetwater Valley would ever know or care about sleeping arrangements. Over the following weeks, Clara threw herself into learning the ranch operation. The breeding program focused on quality horses for both ranch work and cavalry use, with careful documentation required for each animal's lineage and training. The paperwork had been neglected, and Clara spent hours organizing records, establishing systems, creating order from chaos. Miguel proved to be exactly as Jackson described, competent, quiet, and remarkably good with the horses. He treated Clara with respectful courtesy, never questioning her authority over administrative decisions, never making inappropriate comments about her living situation. "Mr. Cole chose well," Miguel said one afternoon as they reviewed the breeding schedule. Previous owner's wife hated ranch life, hated the isolation, made everyone miserable with her complaining. "You, though, you seem to understand this work matters." "It does matter," Clara agreed. Building something worthwhile always matters, even if the rest of the world never notices. As winter settled over Wyoming, the ranch took on a different rhythm. Snow limited outside work, so they focused on maintenance, planning, and preparing for spring breeding season. Clara discovered she had aptitude for business strategy, seeing connections and possibilities Jackson hadn't considered. What if we specialized in horses specifically trained for women riders? She suggested one evening as they reviewed finances by firelight. There's a growing market. Women in eastern cities wanting riding horses, but finding most trainers only work with animals suited for male riders. We could fill that niche. Jackson looked up from the ledger he'd been studying. That's actually brilliant. Higher price point, less competition, and you'd understand the client's needs better than most male trainers. We could advertise in eastern newspapers, maybe even establish a partnership with a dealer in Denver or Chicago. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. Build a reputation for quality animals specifically suited for ladies. You should manage that entire division, Jackson said. Choose the horses, oversee training, handle client communications. Make it yours. The trust implicit in the offer moved Clara deeply. This was partnership, genuine collaboration, where her contributions were valued equally to Jackson's. It was everything her marriage to Thomas had never been. Christmas arrived quietly. They decorated the main house with pine boughs and candles, prepared a feast that stretched their cooking skills, and exchanged simple gifts. Jackson gave Clara a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting for whatever story she chose to write. She gave him a hat she'd ordered from a Denver catalog, practical but finer than anything he'd owned before. To new beginnings, Jackson said, raising his glass of cider. To choosing ourselves, Clara replied. As winter deepened into the new year, something shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to feel less necessary, less desired. Conversations lingered later into the evenings. Accidental touches sparked awareness that couldn't be ignored. They began sitting closer by the fire, shoulders occasionally brushing, finding excuses to work together on tasks that didn't strictly require collaboration. It was Clara who finally addressed what neither had spoken aloud. They were in the barn office, reviewing breeding records. When she set down her pen and turned to face Jackson directly, "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Jackson nodded, his expression cautious. "I've been divorced for 3 months. I've been living here for nearly 4. By any reasonable standard, enough time has passed for propriety's sake." Clara took a breath. "I'm attracted to you. I have been, since that first day at the creek in Sweetwater Valley, though I couldn't admit it then. I value our partnership, our friendship, and I don't want to jeopardize that. But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have developed if I'd had the courage to be honest." Jackson was very still, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure? Not just rebounding from your marriage, not just grateful for stability?" "I'm sure. I've spent months examining my feelings, questioning my motives, making certain I'm choosing from strength rather than weakness. I want to explore what's possible between us, Jackson. If you're interested." His smile started slowly, then spread into something radiant. "Clara, I've been interested since the moment you stood up in that saloon and challenged an entire room of stubborn ranchers. I've just been waiting for you to be ready." He kissed her then, gentle and unhurried, a question and an answer and a promise all at once. Clara felt something unlock in her chest, a final barrier falling away, allowing her to be fully present in a way she'd never experienced. When they finally drew apart, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably talk about what this means. Expectations, future, all of it. We should," Clara agreed. "But maybe we could also just let it unfold naturally. Not rush into definitions or decisions, just see where this goes." "I can do that." Jackson pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious. "But Clara, I need you to know something. I'm not Thomas. I don't need you to bear children to value you. I don't need you to fit any particular shape to love you. You're enough exactly as you are. The words struck deep, healing wounds Clara hadn't realized still bled. How did you get so wise? Painful experience and time to think about it. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I spent years being judged for things I couldn't control, told I wasn't enough because of my circumstances. I learned that the people who truly matter don't require you to be anything except honest. As winter gave way to early spring, their relationship deepened naturally. They were partners in the ranch, friends in conversation, and increasingly lovers in the quiet privacy of their home. Clara discovered that intimacy without the pressure of conception was revelatory, the freedom to enjoy connection for its own sake, not as a means to an end. The breeding program flourished under their combined management. The specialized training for women's horses attracted exactly the clientele Clara had predicted, and by late spring they had a waiting list of orders extending into the following year. Word spread about the quality of their animals and the expertise of their operation. One afternoon in May, a letter arrived from Sweetwater Valley. Martha's familiar handwriting sprawled across the envelope. Clara opened it with trepidation, uncertain what news it might bring. The letter contained updates about mutual acquaintances, town gossip, and near the end, a paragraph that made Clara's breath catch. Thomas remarried last month to Sarah Brennan, the schoolteacher. She's a sweet girl, younger than you, and already expecting their first child. He seems happy, Clara, in a way he never quite managed with you. I'm telling you this not to hurt you, but so you know he's moved on and built the life he wanted. I hope you've done the same. Clara read the paragraph twice, examining her feelings carefully. There was no jealousy, no regret, just a distant gladness that Thomas had found what he needed. They'd both been right to let go, to seek futures that actually fit instead of forcing themselves into ill-suited shapes. Bad news? Jackson asked, noticing her expression. No, just confirmation that leaving was the right choice for everyone involved. She folded the letter carefully. Thomas remarried. His new wife is pregnant. Jackson watched her face closely. How do you feel about that? Happy for him, genuinely, and grateful we both had the courage to walk away before we destroyed each other completely. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the mountains that now felt like home. I don't miss Sweetwater Valley, Jackson. Not the place, not the person I was there. Does that make me terrible? It makes you honest. He joined her at the window, his hand finding hers. We can't mourn lives that didn't fit, Clara. We can only build ones that do. Summer brought new challenges and opportunities. They hired 2 additional hands to manage the expanding operation, including a young woman named Kate, who showed remarkable aptitude for horse training. Clara enjoyed mentoring her, teaching the skills she'd developed while learning from Kate's different perspective. The ranch became known not just for quality horses, but for being a place where women's knowledge was valued, where unconventional backgrounds didn't disqualify capability. They attracted workers others had dismissed, a widow needing employment, a young man with a limp who couldn't do heavy ranch work but excelled at detailed record-keeping, an older cowboy whose drinking problem had cost him jobs elsewhere, but who thrived under Jackson's patient management. We're building something unusual here, Miguel observed one evening. A place where broken people come to become whole again. Maybe we're all broken in different ways, Clara replied. Maybe the point is finding places where our particular breaks don't matter as much as what we can still build despite them. In August, a visitor arrived unexpectedly, Dr. Morrison, traveling through Wyoming to visit his daughter in California. He stayed 3 days, touring the ranch, meeting with Clara and Jackson, observing what they'd created. You made the right choice, he told Clara on his final evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. I wasn't certain when you left, worried you might be running away rather than toward something. But you've built a real life here, Clara, a life that fits who you actually are. I couldn't have done it without Jackson, Clara said. He gave me space to figure out what I wanted, supported me without trying to control me. That's what genuine partnership looks like. Dr. Morrison smiled. Hold on to that. It's rarer than people imagine. As autumn arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Jackson proposed in his characteristically understated way. They were riding fence lines, checking for damage before winter, when he suddenly reined his horse to a stop. "Clara, will you marry me?" She turned to look at him, this man who'd seen her at her worst and believed in her potential, who'd offered partnership before romance, who'd never asked her to be anything except herself. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." They married in November, a year after leaving Sweetwater Valley, in a simple ceremony with Miguel, Kate, and the other ranch hands as witnesses. No church, no elaborate preparations, just two people choosing each other with full knowledge and honest intent. Martha sent a congratulatory letter along with a beautiful quilt she'd made, each patch representing a different memory from Clara's life in Montana. The final square showed mountains and horses, Clara's new chapter rendered in fabric and thread. "She always knew," Clara said, running her hand over the quilt. "Even before I did, Martha knew I'd end up here." "Wise woman," Jackson observed. "We should invite her to visit next summer. We should. She'd love to see what we've built." Clara folded the quilt carefully. "She'd love knowing her faith in me wasn't misplaced." Winter settled over the ranch with its familiar, quiet beauty. Clara and Jackson worked side by side through the cold months, planning expansions for spring, training young horses in the indoor arena they'd constructed, managing the business that sustained them. One evening, wrapped in Martha's quilt before the fireplace, Jackson spoke into the comfortable silence. "Do you ever regret not having children?" Clara considered the question, examining her feelings honestly. "I regret what that loss cost my first marriage, the pain it caused. But for myself, for this life we're building, no, I don't regret it. This ranch, our work, the people we employ, that's its own kind of legacy. Not traditional, but meaningful. We could still adopt if you wanted. There are orphanages in Denver, children who need homes. Maybe someday. Or maybe not. Either way, I'm content with what we have." Clara shifted to look at him directly. "Are you?" "Content, I mean. This wasn't the life you imagined when you bought this ranch." "I didn't imagine anything this good," Jackson said honestly. "I thought I'd build a successful business, live a solitary life, find satisfaction in the work itself. Instead, I found a partner who challenges me, compliments me, makes every day better than the last. That's considerably more than I expected." Outside, snow began falling softly, covering the landscape in pristine white. Inside, fire crackled and warmth surrounded them. Clara thought back to that devastating day in Dr. Morrison's office, when she'd believed her barrenness defined her entire future, marked her as fundamentally broken. She'd been wrong, not about being unable to bear children, that remained true, but about what that meant for her worth, her possibilities, her capacity for happiness and meaningful contribution. The flood in Sweetwater Valley had washed away more than buildings and land. It had washed away the narrow life Clara had been living, exposed the truth of her failing marriage, forced her to confront who she actually was beneath the roles she'd been performing, and in that washing away, in that devastation that had seemed to destroy everything, she discovered something essential, that she was more than her biology, more than others' expectations, more than the limitations anyone tried to place on her. She was Clara Cole now, partner, rancher, business manager, wife. But more than any title or role, she was herself, fully and completely, perhaps for the first time in her life. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, studying her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the hardest things we face become the doorways to our best lives," Clara said. "That we can't always see it when we're in the middle of the storm. But looking back, every painful step led somewhere better than where we started." "You think you'd tell your younger self that? The woman in Dr. Morrison's office?" Clara considered. "I don't know if she'd believe me. But I'd want to tell her that Barren doesn't mean empty. That one closed door doesn't mean all doors are closed. That the life she can't imagine having might be exactly the life she needs." Jackson pulled her closer, and they sat together watching snow fall and fire burn. Two people who'd found each other in the midst of disaster, who'd chosen courage over comfort. who'd built something beautiful from the wreckage of their previous lives outside. The Wyoming winter settled deep and quiet. Inside, warmth and possibility filled every corner. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible over the crackling fire, Clara could have sworn she heard the sound of a creek singing over stones, reminding her of a moment by different water in a different place, when a stranger had stopped to see her as she actually was. That stranger was her husband now. That creek had led her here, and here, finally, was where she belonged. The mountains stood eternal witness beyond their windows, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But within the walls of their home, Clara and Jackson created meaning through their daily choices, their persistent effort, their willingness to keep trying, to keep building, to keep believing that love and work and honest partnership could create something lasting. They would face challenges ahead, harsh winters, difficult business decisions, the ongoing work of two strong-willed people learning to share a life. But they would face them together as equals, with the hard-won wisdom that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most difficult circumstances. And on quiet evenings like this, when snow fell soft and fire burned warm and the world felt both vast and intimate, Clara understood something profound. Happiness wasn't found in perfection or in meeting others' expectations. It was found in acceptance, in growth, in the courage to choose yourself, even when the whole world insisted you shouldn't. She was enough. She always had been. It had just taken a flood, a divorce, and a cowboy with patient eyes to help her finally believe it. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. Jackson's breathing deepened into sleep. Clara allowed her eyes to close, wrapped in warmth and safety and the profound peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new opportunities to build and grow and discover. But tonight, this moment was enough. She was enough. And in a world that constantly demanded more, that small truth felt like the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.